Yeah, all right.
You wanted to say something.
I'm a living example of not the Bible verse that says, do not be unequally yoked.
Mm-hmm. Relax.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean.
Here I am.
We are just a few hours after the first interview, and thank you for returning after a very, very difficult day.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for returning. To refresh the memory of our viewers who have seen the first interview, tell us a little bit again, in a few sentences, about the family of origin, and then about the activity you have developed.
Okay. Yeah. So my family, we became Adventists when I was 7.
Yes.
A family of 4, my brother and I, both born on the 4th of July, 5 years apart, which is a big day in America.
Sure.
We actually were disappointed when we found out the fireworks
and
celebration wasn't about us. Sometimes I still joke that maybe it still is, but anyway. We had big parties too when I was growing up. It was bigger than Christmas. It was awesome. Homemade ice cream. We were out in the country. So I was raised in the country on the Wilderness Battlefield in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. I don't know if I mentioned that part earlier.
Yes,
it was a wonderful place to grow up. For a little while, we relocated to Ohio, and then when I was ready to come to Academy, I wanted to go to Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, so we came back to Virginia, moved back into the same house.
Well, that's incredible.
It is. It really is. Believe God was a part of that as well.
Yeah.
When you look back in your life and you see where God was truly acting, it's amazing.
And still a lot to be seen.
Yes,
you don't realize now.
Yes, the best is yet to come, right? So then, Shenandoah Valley Academy, I graduated in 1984.
That's an Adventist
Yes, it's an Adventist school.
school.
It's like Georgia Cumberland Academy here. It is a 4-year boarding school. I did my freshman year in Ohio in a day academy. My parents would have liked me to have stayed there. But I was really connected still with my Virginia friends, and I wanted to come back. And that's where my brother had graduated as well.
Yes.
So I graduated in 1984 and was struggling a little bit with what to do. And I ended up in Florida living with some friends and working in a new Adventist hospital there in Zephyr Hills. And after going to school and living my life there in the Orlando area, I relocated back to Northern Virginia, D.C. area, to do an internship. We talked about all of that.
So you were studying political sciences, yeah?
Political science. So I graduated from school from the University of Central Florida is where I went and where I got my 4-year degree. I graduated in around 1994. So I had to work and put myself through school. That was a challenge, but it was wonderful. I loved school. I loved college. I think I did better in college than I did in high school. I was very into it and really was struggling with whether to go into a medical field or a legal political field. I chose the political side. Got the internship in D.C. We talked about my job and all of that. In the interim while I was still in the Orlando area in 1989, my father was diagnosed with cancer. And they were living in Virginia at the time, and I started flying home every weekend. And 2 months after his diagnosis, he passed away. So cancer became a cause for me. And so eventually, after my work in Washington, D.C., actually took me to the Government Relations Office in the American Cancer Society. We talked about that. And there was a personal tie to work at the American Cancer Society. And I had been a volunteer with them for quite some time as well. So now I was an employee, and I worked for the American Cancer Society. I did transfer from D.C. to Atlanta in late 99, and from 99 to 2005 worked here, and then in 2005 my son was born, and my new job began.
This is your new
This
job.
is my new job as his mom and a wife and a daughter to my mom who needs care. So that's where I am now. But
Yeah. One aspect very important for you, you were not able to mention in the first program, was that while working for the American Cancer Society, you came to know and to work with a former President of the United States and
Yes.
his wife. Tell
Yes.
us about that.
Well, when I was hired for the American Cancer Society, initially I worked for the Government Relations Office in D.C. and created a lot of Washington, and I had Washington connections before, and they were doing some changes in that office, and the National Home Office wanted to make sure that I stayed with the American Cancer Society, and I wanted to stay as well. I wanted to have a position, and I was willing to move to do so. There was something we were working on called the National Dialogue on Cancer. They needed someone to manage that project. Now, the National Dialogue on Cancer is a group of about 150 health cancer organizations that have something to do with public health. It even included, but it was CEOs, it was heads of these organizations. So the head of the National Cancer, in Texas, the Cancer Institute in Texas, the head of Sloan Kettering, the head of Hudson University Medical School, the head of the CEO of the Ad Council, CEO of the American Cancer Society, CEO of the American Heart Association, organizations that had influence and could meet and talk about things that were, which actually led them to talk about things like heart and diabetes and how diet related to cancer and things like that. But we needed a figurehead. And so when and I'll pause on that a second and just let you know how I became part of it. So when I was transferred to the home office in the Atlanta area, I worked for the chief medical officer. He was ultimately in charge of the National Dialogue on Cancer, and my job, part of my job was to manage that project.
Excuse me, this was a one-time event, or it was?
No, it was something that continued, and I hope it's still continuing. I think it's still going on. It might be called something different, but the concept stayed. We met, at least we tried to have the bigger meeting 1 or 2 times a year, and then smaller subcommittee or steering committee meetings like board of directors, but it was an organization. It was created as an organization and run as its own nonprofit as part of the American Cancer Society. So we were just one piece of it, but because it was sort of our brainchild, so to speak, we were running it from our National Home Office, and we had the resources to do so. Yes. But there was someone like me at the American Heart Association, at the American Diabetes Association, and places like that as well. Yeah. But the person, but we needed a figurehead, someone well-known that had a connection to cancer as well. And as you know, George and Barbara Bush lost their daughter at about 3 years old, many, many years ago, obviously, to cancer. I believe she had leukemia. And that was very near and dear to their heart. In fact, there is a story, and some people think, but she actually told this story. That's how her hair turned white. So when her daughter was going through all that, the stress of the event, turned her hair, and that's how she got her white hair. It was, and she always said it was out of love for her daughter.
and she kept it like that.
And yes, I mean it was stayed like that. It was a natural, something that happened naturally that she didn't have any control over. So George and Barbara Bush were asked to co-chair the National Dialogue on Cancer, and because of that, because I was the one that kind of managed the high-level volunteers at that level, I was able to work closely with them. And when we had the smaller meetings and we had the planning meetings for the bigger meetings and all of the planning and all of that went into it, we got to spend more time with them in between. I had the privilege of visiting them in their Kennebunkport home, along with other colleagues of mine. I got to go to his 80th birthday party and watch him jump out of an airplane. He was an amazing man. They were an amazing couple. If ever there was an example of a marriage, it's theirs. And their Christian faith was very strong and guided them every step of the way. And you could tell. In their marriage, I don't know if I ever saw them together not holding hands. They were just an incredible couple. They chided each other a lot. They picked on each other a lot. But I love being around them. They both have very strong presence. And when they were together, he wasn't the boss. But they complemented each other well. They bounced off of each other very well.
So they are not just symbolic or
No,
they are
they
very
were
much involved.
Yes.
Wanting to make it happen,
Yes.
something happen.
Yes. This was a big deal for them because for them, when in the political environment they were in, having a bunch of heads come to the same table and talk about something that was so, they all had a common goal to cure cancer.
Sure.
And we always made a joke, what is it that you do for the American Cancer Society? And the answer was, I'm trying to put myself out of a job. So they loved that. That's how they operated. That's what they did. And they were very much involved and wanted to be part of the planning process. And involved us too, whenever there were big events that we could be part of and network in and advance the cause even more, they would invite us. And I often was fortunate enough to get, pulled into that. And so I had some amazing experiences. Doing that kind of work. That wasn't the only thing I did with the American Cancer Society, but it certainly was a highlight, and I just felt great being part of all that.
So again, for how long have you been working with the former president? And
So I started working with him when about late 99, early 2000 is when we really started to ramp up the National Dialogue on Cancer, and basically when I arrived here in the Atlanta office after my transfer from DC on through 2005 till when my in fact I saw him again just before my son was born, and he had a lot to say. He was just beaming. I mean, they're very big in family. And when I told him that I was going to be leaving the American Cancer Society, he said, "What are you going to do? What can you possibly where can you possibly make more of a difference than you're making here?" And my answer was, well, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I can't top that." So that's the kind of conversation he had with me. He was very down to earth. Yes.
Very personable.
Very personal. Yes. Yes.
Obviously, that had made a strong impression on you and your view on what does it mean to be a person, to have a family, things like that. But I suppose that working with them, as they were all volunteers, probably weekends were the most, the best time for them to have those meetings. Were that making you to have conflicts over Sabbath?
Sometimes it did, but what we would usually do, and our meetings traveled. So we often, it's funny, they transferred me to DC, or from DC to Atlanta, and I spent half my time at DC, and I spent time in New York as well. So we would travel for our meetings, but a lot of times our board meetings, because these are volunteers, they actually preferred, you would think that they would do more weekends, but they actually preferred to try the ends of the week to kind of stretch it out so that they could be home and spend some of the weekends with their families. And usually their organizations were benefited by the work that they did with the American Cancer Society. If you served on a board of directors, or you became a president, or you were an officer on the board of directors of an organization that size, it is good for whoever you work for. And they were CEOs, so they could kind of, they could make their schedule. So we would often, depending on the size of the meeting, we'd start on like a Wednesday or Thursday, and we'd end midday Sabbath morning. A lot of times they tried to make sure that my work was completed, and I would usually fly back that night, Saturday night, but I would be on hand just in case someone needed assistance. But we were able to work it out so that I could stay away from that. And it got a little bit easier as they got to know me better. So the conflicts were a little bit less, but it could be a struggle from time to time when stuff was going on, and then you try to have that rationale. It's health, it's the health, but I'm not a doctor or nurse, so I can't really use that excuse. So I tried very hard to do my work by Friday night.
Yeah, but in the meantime, I mean, working with some of the most important persons of the planet, but you also had your own life. It was nice seeing beautiful families, but what about your own? So would you like to share with us some of your own journey?
Sure. So my husband and I, we sort of started the family thing late. We were married later in life, and a couple of years after we got married, so we were married in 2002, and in 2004, in June, we knew someone who lost their 2 boys, and her mother and her brother's fiance. I think you might, at any rate, it was a very difficult time. It was in May, and I remember thinking, man, I don't know if I want to raise a family if you have the possibility of losing them. And it's not that I hadn't already faced loss, but the idea of losing a child just wrenched at me. But we had been trying for quite some time, and finally, not too long after that difficult time, we were actually thinking maybe we should rethink this. And God had a different plan, and I got pregnant with our son, and he was born in March of 2005.
Yeah, that was the event you alluded already to, as marking the end of your work with American Cancer Society.
I worked with him. I stayed employed with him through August. I did maternity leave. I came back and helped them find someone for my position. And then in August of 2005, I ended my work there and became a stay-at-home mom. You covered somehow. You mentioned that it was difficult. There were moments when you were thinking on changing your plans. Would you open a little more? Sure. So we really wanted to have at least one more child, and about maybe a year or so, about a year after Landon was born, I got pregnant again, and after a bit of time, I lost that baby. And then not too long after that, I was able to get pregnant again. And that was more difficult because it was 2. It was twins. And the doctor was trying really hard to help me stay. We were working medications, different things to try to keep the pregnancy, but it was not viable after a certain amount of time, and I went, it took about 12 weeks for that process to play out, and not too very long. We waited a little longer, and I think we were starting to rethink, maybe this is just, God is telling us that Landon is our jackpot. But I got pregnant again, and I was pregnant longer, and there was actually some growth, but there was no heartbeat.
Oh, no, not at all.
No. So that was it.
How it was for you and for your husband?
It's very hard because for most people on the outside that may not have ever been through it, a miscarriage, losing a baby like that is like it's a medical procedure. It's a medical condition. It's just something that happens. But it is a death, and it is a loss, because the second you find out you're pregnant, that child is yours.
Sure.
And then suddenly they're not. And the difficulty with the husband, from Pierre's standpoint, is he really wanted another child. but he didn't want to stress his grief to me because I was going through some of my own. One thing that was very helpful was I found out that if I talked about it, other women would open up of experiences they had and would tell me, encourage me, and it's why I talk about it myself, because they told me they never talked about it because they always felt awkward and people didn't seem to understand that it was truly a death, a loss. When you have a miscarriage, people don't send cards or flowers, come to your house or make you food.
It's a lonely.
It's
a
very
lonely
lonely because
process.
it's just like, well, you were, something happened and, it took only a little bit of time and then you're fine now.
But you are marked, you are changed forever.
You are. And someone I quoted me or told me about something that Ellen White said, that when you go to heaven, when you're in heaven, the babies will be brought to you. And I appreciated that. I appreciated hearing that. And I don't know how that works exactly,
Sure.
but it's a hope, and it's certainly something that that I look forward to. Whatever God has in store on that front, I look forward to that. And it took a little bit we never opened it up to Landon. We didn't until very recently tell my son, who's now 14, that
he's already 14.
He is 14, I know. He's just about, well, I say he's almost taller than me, and he'll tell you he is taller than me, and he's probably right. I was not sure I was ready for that yet.
So you shared that with him.
Yes.
And how was he reacting?
Well, I mean, it's funny. He's a 14-year-old boy. He's like, well, okay. And then he'd ask me questions about it. And it didn't seem to faze him too much, but I didn't want him to later find out, or hear us talking and find out from someone else. But it was a tough thing for Pierre and I to go through. And every once in a while, people will say something insensitive like, why did you just decide to have one child? Or it's like, I didn't decide. Someone decided for me. But I will say that not too long after, Landon, we call him our jackpot. He was a great baby. He's been a great son, and we've been able to put all of our attention into him. And some of my attention had to be given to my mother as well. And had I had more than one child, I don't know if I would have been as available to help her as I was. So, whatever God's plan was.
Do you feel that going through 3 losses, 3 miscarriages in a row, made it difficult for you to take care of your son?
No. It didn't. There was a time. The second miscarriage was physically very difficult on me. It took me it took 12 weeks for the process. The first process took 2 days. So the first miscarriage, it's a physical process, and sometimes it can be very quick, and sometimes it can be very, very slow, and the way your body responds. So physically, it was difficult because Landon was still a baby or toddler at the time and starting to walk around. I did have a lot of friends around me that helped. They didn't know why they were helping. I hadn't told everyone what had happened, but it was difficult for a little bit because I was physically worn out and very, very, very tired, anemic. But I worked really hard. I also gained a lot of weight. It was difficult. That made it hard as well. But I just prayed through it. I will say, you go through these bottoms in your life, and that was one of my bottoms. I was working really hard at the school. At the time, that was helpful. That helped. I was starting to do more volunteer work at the Atlanta North School, and that kept me busy. And I had someone, the principal there she knew what I was going through, and she made sure, she's like, when you're ready, I have stuff for you to do. And I think she knew I needed some distraction.
Was she?
April, Shonda.
She has been in the program.
Yes. So.
Yeah. What were your feelings and reactions toward God when you went through all of that?
Well, if I'm being totally honest, I was probably angry at first. my prayers probably went something like this: Lord, I know you have a plan, but I can't imagine how this could be part of your plan. And the Hillary Scott song, "Thy Will," your will, it's just like it can't. That my heartbreak is part of your plan. When it came out, even though years after my miscarriages, I thought about it and I looked deeper into when she wrote that song. If I'm correct, I think she wrote the song after she had a miscarriage as well. So the song connected to me years later. I just, wow, that's how I felt. How can this kind of heartache, how can this kind of loss be part of God's plan? And I knew better. I'd been through, I've watched loss, I've watched catastrophe, I watched terrorist attacks unfold on television, and I know God was still very much present. And I knew he was present in my life, but I've always said that it's better to express anger to God and pray anger to God than to not pray at all. And I kept the lines of communication open, and he began to show me how important, I found that talking about it helped other women too that had gone through it. So I found good. All things work together for good. You can't always see it. But in my relationship with God, I struggled, but I kept it. I stayed with it and knew that I couldn't survive without it. Whatever the reason was, however angry I was, I knew that without God, I wouldn't be able to get through it.
Now, being so deep into this kind of experience, probably you did also some research. I have absolutely no idea. Is there any way to know the ratio of women going through similar situations?
I don't know scientifically what that ratio is, but I can tell you there are way more than people realize.
Because this is an untold, unspoken, undisclosed thing. Yeah.
It is. People don't feel like talking about it. It's not considered a real death unless you've really been through it, which is kind of sad. I think that, it is. It is. But as in this society, there are those, as we know even now with all the things that are going on politically with women and their decisions, babies, before they're born, are not really always treated like babies. But of course, we believe, and I strongly believe and know. I heard my son's heartbeat when he was 7.5 weeks, when I was 7.5 weeks pregnant. So for me, but I didn't need that. Obviously, I wanted to hear the heartbeat, but as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I was somebody's mom. So that for me, it was a very real loss, and only people who have really been through it can truly understand it. And it opens up communication. If you're willing to talk about it, then suddenly women who have never talked about it before would open up to me, and wow, and I found out, I was surprised how many women, I went through that too, and I really didn't tell anyone, or before their current child, they had maybe had miscarriages before that, and it's some after. And medically, it's very difficult to figure out why it happens. Sometimes it's just not viable. I was older and probably higher risk. It might have been, there may have been, again, God has his reasons and his plans. We don't always know what that is, but you always think you did something wrong. Did I didn't know I was pregnant. Did I drink caffeine, too much caffeine? Did I do this? Did I do that? You start to blame yourself, and the doctors will tell you it's hardly ever something you do. It's just something that happens, and it happens more often than you know. And I know the doctors had been through this a lot as well. So it is very common, unfortunately.
Kellie, you previously to that, you have also been through other difficult times, both personal and as a nation. Let's keep the national thing for the end.
Okay.
And, let's make a few steps back.
Okay.
On the personal level.
All right. So, marriage, I was married before when I was in the Orlando area. I told you I started going back to college on my own, and I was also working full-time for the law firm that I told you about. I met a man who had a very young age. He skipped college, and at a very young age started doing audiovisual production work out of his trunk, the trunk of his car, basically.
So he was a gifted.
Very gifted, very knowledgeable about business. Started a small business, it became a very large business, is a very large business today. Worked with Disney and whatnot. Well, I met him early in his career. He was just getting it all started, but he was doing very well. And we dated for about 3.5 years, and in 1989 we were married, and he was Jewish. And in order to be married to him, I had to basically denounce my faith and convert to Judaism. Now, there is a lot of story to that I know that we don't have time to get into, and the actual witnessing I was able to do with the rabbi that I had to study with, he was amazed that a Christian knew as much about the Bible as I did. He just didn't, there were some things I pointed out to him he didn't know because they focus on the Torah. And I had a really good relationship with that rabbi, actually. But even though my soon-to-be husband was not a weekly practicing in his faith, it was just for him, it was more of a heritage than it was a faith. It was very important to him that but we had made the decision that we would not have children because I knew that you had to raise your children Jewish, and I did say I couldn't do that. But for some reason I felt that that I would be okay. And I will say too that my personal relationship with God at the time and my struggle, I was struggling with my Adventist faith because I was sort of in that time in my life where I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to live like somehow. Not having God really truly in your life is better than, and I learned very quickly that was not true.
Excuse me, before continuing the story. So you said you studied with a rabbi for an extended period of time.
Yes.
Was that also helping you to enrich your understanding of the Old Testament in a healthy, in a really, really deep...
It really did. And for some reason, I was very stubborn. I think God was using what was going on with me to really help me understand my own faith and my own belief and what I had been brought and how strong that foundation truly was. I will also say that, and I don't know if you caught this, but the same year that I got married in November of 1989, and in June of 1989, my father passed away. Now, there was some pressure to... I called the wedding off 3 times.
Really?
Something was just not right. And I wish that I had been smarter or more wise, but you were also going through I was going through a very emotional time. And his family was being a little bit unfair in terms of the financial implications of pulling away from a very expensive wedding. And my family couldn't have afforded that. And I won't go too deep into that, but there was also emotional pressure. And I also believed my family needed something good to happen that year. Although my family would tell you they didn't think that was a good thing. That said, I went ahead with the marriage. I went ahead with and the interesting thing is when you're converted from a Gentile to a Jew, and it doesn't happen very often, but in this case it did, it's an immersion, just a baptism much like ours, and you do study with a rabbi, you do, and I did go ahead with that. I don't know that I was truly in it, and the way the Bible tells us not to be unequally yoked started to resonate with me early on in the marriage, and I realized that I had made a very big mistake. He was a good man, It is a good man. It just, I made a mistake.
Excuse me, what were the reasons you cancelled the wedding several times? It was mainly religious or other relational
I think it was
problems
more,
or
there were more, it
a
was
combination of...
maybe a compilation of the two. Relationally, it was a very stressful time because I had lost my father, and the day I got back, I was being pressured to make decisions about the wedding. I wasn't, I needed time. I needed to decompress. I needed to get, there was one also very, very telling thing that occurred that to this day, it resonates with me, and I wish that I had really picked up on the sign. He was busy. He was the boss in his work, and he had a show that he was doing in the Atlanta area, actually. We lived in Orlando, but he had a show he was doing in Atlanta. And we weren't married yet, but my father died. And he knew that I was there. We both knew that it was imminent. I had gotten the call basically less than 24 hours before, you need to come and you need to come right away. And I had just been there that weekend, so he stayed behind. I went ahead. I called him, told him he passed away. I asked, when will you be here? And he said, I'm not coming. So my soon-to-be husband wasn't at the funeral for my father. And I needed someone there for me, and he wasn't there. And that was a very big thing. That was one of the reasons. That was one of the times that if you can't be there for me. But we made up with some pressure. I got some pressure to not call off the wedding. And then things were just, I was having difficulties with his family. Some things they said, some things they did that were hurtful to me, and again, there were signs, there were things that were happening. You know, God does try to tell us. He does everything he can. We talk about him.
Usually we choose not to.
We do. He does what he can, but he's not going to force us. We talk about him knocking on the door. Stand at the door. I'm knocking. But he doesn't break it down. We have to accept his help. We have to accept what he's trying to tell us. And I was a very stubborn young woman at the time. I actually, young and extremely unintelligent. I'll use, I was going to use another word, but, I'm not smart. And I made some choices and it took me a while to make my way back. And when I called my brother, I found out it's interesting when your family never gets off their knees. I knew my brother had prayed and prayed. They supported me. They even liked him. They accepted him. They accepted him into the family.
Very interesting.
But they secretly prayed that somehow I would see it, and hopefully see it in time before the wedding. And I did, but I just didn't listen to myself. And I didn't listen to God. I didn't, pay attention to the signs. I do believe that divorce is wrong, and I should never have gotten married in the first place. I was also too young, I think, and too impulsive, and allowed environmental things that were going on around me to make the decision for me rather than making the decision that my heart was trying to tell me to make. And I encourage anyone, there is no reason to rush into any relationship. And the most important relationship to have, to make sure that you choose the right person for you, is to have a close relationship with God first. Let that be your guide. Let him choose your mate. And later on in life, I did that. I was still stubborn about it, but he pushed a little harder on me this time, I think. And I think I was a little bit more open to his leading and found the most incredible husband and father in Pierre that I could possibly have.
So his first name is French.
Yes.
Why?
He was born in France, a place called Saint-Gaucher. His mother's French. born and raised there, and she literally brought all of her family, all of her little young children over on a ship. And they arrived in Ellis Island. They have records in Ellis Island. It's very cool. So he was, when he was 8, they came over, they relocated their family to Florida, and that's where he grew up. He grew up in Lakeland, the Lakeland area, and ended up in Atlanta, and that's where we met. We met in church too, just say that.
But his religious heritage was not Adventist.
No, it's not. It was French Catholic. They were really not not practicing Christians.
And the father?
From Tennessee. I'm thinking Southern Baptist, if there was any religion in their family at all, but I don't think that they were churchgoers. That's just a speculation. I don't actually know for sure, but based on my knowledge, I don't think so.
So what was different with your marriage with Pierre? In the making of, I mean.
I truly believe God put him in front of me. I truly believe that God chose him for me. It's funny, the night before we met, I prayed a prayer. I had just moved to Atlanta. I had been working 70 hours a week, traveling all the time. I was exhausted. I was in a new city, and I was still very much involved with my church in Virginia, and I knew it was time to break off. I knew it was time to relocate completely. You know, sometimes it's hard to break strong ties. And I also was lonely, and I had actually gone to the church once or twice before, and I had visited other churches, and I just hadn't found a connection. And I told God, and this is funny, we should never really do this, but every once in a while we do, you know, hey, this is what we're going to do. So I prayed and I said, look, I want to meet somebody. And it wasn't a man. I just wanted to meet people. I wanted to connect. I wanted to find a church I felt I could be at home at. And I said, but, you know, I hang out in the lobby, and many churches are like this. It can be very cold. Sometimes it can be very difficult. You see all these people talking to each other. They know each other. No one's walking up to you.
You can't penetrate.
Right, exactly. It's very difficult to do so. And now that did change. But that night I said, you know, I'm tired. I don't want to go to church. But this thing in my head just kept saying, you know, no, you need to go. You need to go. You need to establish a church here. Go to the Atlanta North Church. Try that again. You know, this was I'd been once. It's like, that's the only church that really is like the ones I'm used to. And it's the one I feel more comfortable in, but I haven't met anyone, and they don't talk to me. And, you know, the thing in my brain says, well, you didn't really give them a lot of time. You know, you didn't hang out in the lobby long enough. So I said, okay, I'll give you 5 minutes. And Lauren, I'll give you 5 minutes. And I'll go, but I really don't want to just hang out.
After working for so many years in the corporate world, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, it's a lot of time.
It is, you know, my time's important. You know, it's not too much to do, and I'm tired, you know, that's what.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So that morning, now, I found out later that Pierre prayed a very similar prayer. He was finding out that his marriage, he had a conversion experience when his marriage was starting to end, and tried very hard to reconcile that marriage. It was breaking his heart that was happening, and he knew that it was against God's plan that a marriage not stay together, and he really wanted it to stay together, but he was finding out, and I think God was telling him too, there's only so much that can be done here, and you have done everything you can. And he was starting to realize it just was not going to happen. But he was lonely, and he wanted companionship as well. And he prayed a very similar prayer. So it doesn't have to be a girlfriend. I just want companionship. So I walked into the church, and what used to be the deacon's room, you know how the Atlanta North Church is laid out. You've been, the deacon's room, which is now the AV room, but he was working in there. He was a deacon and was serving that day. He flew out and almost knocked me over. And I, you know, really thought nothing of it. I kind of dusted myself off and moved on in, and I sat down, and I could sort of feel him looking at me. But I don't know if you know Pierre very well, but he's very quiet. This
Yes.
particular day, he wasn't. So Beth Bain, who became a very close friend of mine later, and her husband were hosting a potluck at their house that afternoon for the young adults, or the not so young adults, as we were called them. And he wanted to invite me, but he didn't want to be too forward. He thought it would be too forward. So he wanted her to do it because it was her house. And she was talking to someone. She said, I'll get in a minute. She's about to leave. She's leaving. She's going out the door. You need to catch her now. She may never come back. You've got to go get her. I want her to go to this lunch. And I mean, he was certain that this was his answer to prayer. And he, as much as told me that day, talk about pressure. You know, it's like, well, I'm not sure I was ready for this much. And I was looking at my watch. I was walking out the door, 4 minutes, 59 seconds. And Beth Bain comes to the door and says, wait. Hi, I'm Beth Bain. We're hosting. We'd like you to come. And up pops Pierre. I'll drive. If you don't know where it is, I'll drive. But Beth later told me that he bugged her 3 times to come and invite me to that potluck, and would not leave her alone until I did. So that's how everything started.
Yeah. So a different approach to making a family and returning to the church.
Yes.
Was there a different way to think church, to go church, to be in church? After that, detour with your first marriage.
Okay. So yes, I guess I kind of skipped over that part a little bit. I did find a way back to the church through my mom. She had moved to the Orlando area after my father passed away. She needed some medical care at the time, and she actually lived with me and my new husband for the first 6 months till she got on her feet. And I had a friend who had an apartment off of her home. It was a good setup for my mom. So she lived near me to be closer to me. And she worked in that area as well. Still very much working age. She was kind of restarting her life, and she became a member of a church there and just pushed me, encouraged me to come to church with her. And so I did. And I loved the pastor there. He baptized me, Jim Davidson.
Jim Davidson?
Yes.
Who is now working at the union?
Yes.
Interesting.
He was the pastor of the Winter Springs Church in Florida, and rebaptized me. So I restudied. I wanted immersion. I was actually offered profession of faith, but because of what I had done, I felt the conversion to Judaism, that a full rebaptism was necessary, at least in my heart. That's what I felt. I did that, and that had nothing to do, often people before they're remarried, they're encouraged to be rebaptized. Always get rebaptized because your heart wants you to be rebaptized, not so that you can fit a requirement of the church. I want to say that. I had no prospects of a future husband. I just, my most important relationship, or at least it's finally becoming my most important relationship at the time, was my relationship with God, and I wanted to rebuild it. It took time. I was stubborn. I came into it slowly. I was of the world more than I should have been, and I wanted to bring myself back, and it can take time to rebuild after you have strayed from God. But that was, and I think that Pierre's was probably very similar from his divorce. He had a conversion experience near the end of his marriage and was rebaptized himself, and he, I think, was baptized again after his divorce. So that was really the journey. And something else, my church in Virginia, when I relocated to Virginia, there was a woman someone encouraged me, gave me a flyer for Women's Ministries event. I wasn't connected to a church there yet. I was working a lot. Same situation as here in Atlanta. And this goes back a little bit. This woman, oftentimes we tell people, come to church, I'll meet you in the lobby. And it's just a thing you say. Well, someone gave me a flyer to go to this women's ministries event. It looked really interesting. It was actually one of the best events I've been to. It was at one of the churches in Maryland. And I went, and I met someone who went to the Vienna Seventh-day Adventist Church, and her name is Kathy Young, went to the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Vienna, Virginia. And that was close to where I lived. And I said, I've heard about that. I was thinking of visiting. She said, please come this Sabbath. I'll meet you in the lobby. And give me your number. I'll call you and remind you to come to church. Well, oftentimes you don't do what you say you're going to do. And it's not that you don't want to, but, sometimes it's just a thing you say. I've invited you, it's up to you now. She called me that Thursday to make sure I was going to come. And she was waiting for me in the lobby and brought me into the church. And I became very involved. And that's where I really started coming back to the church.
Interesting. Such a small thing, in fact. But,
yes.
Because it fulfilled a deep need.
Yes.
For human connection, for fellowship, for openness.
Yes.
And
my devotion, my real first devotion, I went through the motions, but I dug back into the Desire of Ages and read a chapter a day. And as you can imagine, Ellen White was really not my favorite person in Academy. But I felt a need to, it's like, maybe it wasn't presented to me in the right way. Let's try this again. And so someone suggested, and this woman, Kathy, was the one who said, don't start with patriarchs and prophets. Don't start with the legalist, the more educational part. Go straight to the gospel. Go to the Desire of Ages. It doesn't matter what order you go in. Just read that one first.
Good advice.
And yes, and I give that same advice. It has led the way I bring people into this as well as, if you want to really read a book that gets you closer to Christ and that you can really get your teeth into and really get closer, that's the one. And it did. It was just a really, really, really big piece for me. And I was very connected to that church.
Kellie, I'm very humbled and very impressed. I don't think in any other program, and I had quite a number of them, someone came to be so open about different aspects of their lives. And I also I'm confident that our viewers will also see that, and we all have to learn from that. Just a few minutes left, very few minutes left. Tell us a little bit about your involvement, if we could say that, in the national tragedy of 9/11.
Wow. As I told you, my job took me to D.C. quite a bit. And the National Dialogue on Cancer often had meetings there, especially for their subcommittees, or what we called our steering committee, which was about between 15 and 20 members. It's like a board of directors. We were planning a big meeting, and the chief of staff for former President Bush was at that meeting. CEO of the Ad Council, many figureheads around that meeting, but it was a smaller group. It was the 15, between 15 and 20.
Yes.
I flew out with my boss from Atlanta on September 10, and it was interesting because often we would sit in separate places, but when the plane started, and the seatbelt light comes off, he would walk back and we would talk about, some things we needed, some business, and do some business, and then we would land. And when he came back to talk to me, he said, how long did it take you to get on the plane? He was just curious. He said, well, from the time I pulled into the parking lot, parked my car, it was a one-day trip. It was supposed to be in and out. Well, it was supposed to be. We were staying one night, and the meeting was going to start at 8 o'clock that night and go through noon the next day. That was the plan. So I had a bag. I didn't check. I just rolled on with my bag. And we flew so much that we also got to go through a quicker security clearance. So pretty much 45 minutes. Parked my car, got into the airport, went through security very quickly, checked in, on the plane. You didn't have to leave yourself too much time. And his comment was, that was kind of scary when you think about it, how quickly we could get on that plane. didn't think about that, of course, until the next day. So we were having a meeting. I was responsible for the materials, the content of the meeting, to make sure everything went smoothly. Logistics, I was also responsible for making sure everybody was set in their hotel, and that everything was in place. I was also very much a part of the meeting. I got often asked questions, and I was the one that, if something needed to be done, I was the one that made sure it got done and moved it forward. So he had asked me the night before for a set of materials for the next meeting, and the meeting we were starting at 8:15. And the business person, the person in the business office, told me it would be done by 8:15. Well, he wasn't quite done. There were large amounts, and they had to be collated. He said, come back at 8:30, between 8:30 and 8:45. I promise I'll have them done. I said, that's fine, because what we do is we start with a continental breakfast, and believe me, these details are important. But we make everybody turn their phones off. Now, in those days, there was no such thing as an Apple iPhone. Sure. They were flip phones, and you could turn them off. They were either powered on or down. You could put them on silent, but the protocol was you turn your phone off. The only one that didn't have to turn her phone off was me, because I was the connection to the office. Well, so 8:30 rolls around, and my boss is pushing me for these materials, but I was busy in the meeting at the moment. I said, I'll go as soon as I can. So probably about 8:40, I walked over to the business center, and it was close. It had to have been 8:45. I walked over, and he was looking at the computer, and I was angry because I saw my materials sitting on the copier, and what are you, surfing the net? Listen, I need these materials, and I need them now. And I'm all business-like and everything. And he said, a plane just hit the World Trade Center, I think. And he said it kind of nonchalant, and my reaction was, again? Because oftentimes, and they didn't really know what was going on. Everybody was wondering, what just happened? Oftentimes, a small plane, a pilot not so intelligent, would clip the antenna in the tower that had the antenna, and I think it was the South Tower. And so I said, look, I don't have time for this. And he said, something about this doesn't look right. And I came around the counter, and I looked over his shoulder, and I saw this, and I said, that's not a small plane. And we were watching a live stream on his computer. So at this time, you could watch news live on the computer, not as easily as you can now, but it was certainly happening in real time. So it's about 8:46, and this has happened, and I'm watching as the second plane comes in.
I was here in Atlanta on that morning, exactly like you.
And first reaction was, this isn't an accident, this is an attack. And my heart just sank. I'm a patriotic person. I love this country. And I love, New York is one of my favorite cities. I spent a lot of time there. But the weight of the responsibility that fell on me at that moment was, I am the only person that knows. And about 10 people that are in that room
had no idea.
Are from New York. No, none of them had any idea. All of their phones are off. As far as they know, everything is perfectly normal. The person suddenly realized the person they're going to hear it from was sitting right here. So I got all the information that I could. I did what I do. I gathered information. We only knew at that time about the towers. We also knew that planes were being grounded right away. National was shut down. The airport there was shut down. I remember walking down this very big hallway and seeing people pour out of these meeting rooms, and beepers, beepers were still a thing, were going off, phones are ringing, people are crying, screaming, some were overreacting. There were a lot of rumors that there were other explosions in DC, and we were told that there were planes that were headed directly for us that were unaccounted for, which was very true. But they didn't know how many at the time, because they were still trying to contact all of the legitimate planes and get them on the ground to try to figure out if there were more. And in fact, just before I entered the room, which was probably about 15 minutes later, And my boss was probably getting pretty angry with me about now, but 10, 15 minutes later, I pretty much figured out that we could potentially be in danger. The hotel I was staying in that we were at was 9th Avenue. So the White House is here. The White House is here. The Capitol building's here. They didn't know where in D.C. it was headed, but as far as they knew it was headed. What a lot of people don't realize is that the F-16s, or the fighter jets that were sent up, the military jets that were sent up to locate these unaccounted planes and potentially shoot them down, had been de-weaponized by the Clinton administration. They had no weapons. The only way to stop those planes, yes, exactly. All of this is running through my mind, and I knew enough about Washington to know that a lot of what I was hearing was more rumor than anything, but I did believe the fact about the planes, and I did believe that there was a potential for more attack, just because of the sequential nature of the two buildings. I didn't think we were done. And maybe that's just something, maybe an instinct that God put in me. I don't know. My biggest responsibility at that moment was I had to tell a lot of people that lived and worked in New York and were very, so I remember walking down the hallway. There were double doors into the room. I stood there and I prayed and said, Lord, if I ever needed your strength, it's now. Because I was, very emotionally wanting to break down and knowing they need my strength. And I have to be, what I was hoping would happen is I would go to my boss and say, this is happening. I need you to tell them. I need you to stop the meeting. When I did that, he's, no, that's all on you. He was angry, he was not angry at me, but angry at what had happened, and he didn't always react in the best way. I won't tell you what he said. And then the consultant that we had, the protocol was you go to the person who's supporting the chair. So I went to him and I, do you have my materials? And it's like, look, I need you, forget the materials right now. I need you to stop the meeting. No, he refused. And and so then it's like, great. So I went to the chair and I said, LaSalle, I need you to stop the meeting now. I can't tell you why, but I'm about to. I need you to just tell everything needs to stop. He stopped the meeting. Everybody's looking at me. And that's when I told him that we had been attacked.
Did you feel that your prayer was
Yes.
fulfilled?
I was strong all day. I had his strength all day, and there were a lot of people that thought this was like the end, and I knew. I mean, anyone who understands the plan of salvation, what is going to happen with the events that play out in Revelation, we're not even close to. I mean, we're close, but we're not. The magnitude. The magnitude of what's going to happen, and that is only a very small thing compared to. I also, my faith was tested. Well, not tested. My faith was actually very strong during that time because I really believe that without God, I wouldn't have gotten through it. It really did hit me hard. And being in an affected city, we felt the Pentagon, and we didn't understand what we were feeling at the time. And I think that's why the rumors were running that an explosion had happened. We were just across the 14th Street Bridge. If you cross the 14th Street Bridge, the Pentagon is almost visible from there. So you can feel that there is the Potomac River between you, but we weren't that far. The vibration of the ground, because the Pentagon is underground, and some of the underground was affected when the plane hit. We felt that, but we didn't know what we were feeling at the time, but everybody's overreacting. And so the day after, we had to work very hard. I had booked planes, trains, and automobiles throughout the day. Nothing. Clue how they kept booking you, but you knew that, and we didn't know how we were going to get out. One gentleman actually bought an expedition to take his group home. But we ended up being able to rent cars that day, and when we drove across the bridge, we saw the Pentagon. It was still smoking.
Yeah, so that was the day the world changed a lot.
Immediately, in a matter of seconds. When I saw the fire in Notre Dame, it reminded me, so quickly a skyline. 1 minute you have a skyline, and so quickly it changes. Life is so fleeting, and without the knowledge of the second coming of Christ, the knowledge that we are in a very temporary place, that day would have been way harder on me than it was. And don't get me wrong, it was one of the worst days of my life.
For sure.
And I have stories from that day that would take way too long to tell you or explain. But I think I was reinforced in my feeling and my relationship with God that day, because it's like, wow, you really do need to come. This really needs to be a temporary place.
Yes, yes.
So.
Well, I think there couldn't be a better conclusion of our second conversation. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
May God bless you at this starting point in a new place, a new
Overwhelming.
experience. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless.
God bless you.